Once upon a time, a player introduced Christianity to his animals in Minecraft, and over time it developed into an entire Christian kingdom in Minecraft. Hey guys, welcome back to Nations of Minecraft. So Genesis is very unique, and most people don't know what to think of them. On the one hand, they do a lot of work to help the poor and stuff, but on the other hand, a lot of people see them as being colonized by a religion from the outside world. So yeah, there are a lot of mixed feelings about them. The Kingdom of Genesis is located right here at the center of the world, sort of acting like a bridge between the East and the West. Now, you would think that because of this, other countries would want to travel through them to trade. And it's kind of true, yeah, but most countries are kind of suspicious of Genesis, and they don't really want their citizens traveling there that much. There are many reasons why, but the biggest one is because Genesis is really into their Christianity, and is always trying to spread Christianity, which causes other countries to kind of not like that so much, and want to restrict contact with them. Another reason is because, since they're always spreading Christianity, some countries feel like they may have colonized other regions. We'll talk more about that in this section. So, Genesis is broken up into 7 duchies, each ruled by a duke. Now, the first one is like the original one, the most populated one, called Juktan. This is where the capital city, the city of Genesis, is. And you can see there are churches and castles everywhere in Genesis, in the capital city, and in all the many small towns that also exist in Juktan. The next region is Midesh, and this is mostly desert, but it's very similar to Juktan. Once again, castles and churches everywhere, and Midesh doesn't have any big cities, just small desert villages scattered everywhere. Now, the next region is where things get controversial, and this is part of the reason why countries are suspicious of Genesis. This is the region of Pagran, and this island, you can see, this was a jungle island that used to belong to witches. Witches had lived there for thousands of years. Now, there are many sides to this story. If you ask Genesis, what happened was the witches kept attacking Christians in the country, so Genesis sent their army there to drive the witches out. But if you ask the witches, they'll say that the Christians came in for no reason and invaded them and burned down all their shrines, and they were forced to leave. So yeah, a lot of people argue whether the invasion of Pagran was justified. But since it used to belong to witches and now belongs to Christians, that's why people accuse Genesis of colonizing people to spread their ideas. But Genesis would argue that they never colonized. Most people who didn't attack them joined them willingly. So an example of this is the next region, Jiden. Now Jiden is mostly jungle, and the people who lived here traditionally were jungle natives who were not related to the Genetians at all. And when Genesis came here, most of the jungle natives joined them willingly, and they willingly abandoned their own language and spoke Genetian and became Christian because of how much work Genesis was doing to help the poor in this region. But their neighbors to the south, who are also jungle natives, Kaulia, they don't think so. Now, Kaulia, they're jungle natives just like Jiden, but unlike Jiden, they do not like Genesis, and they accuse Genesis of colonizing their cousins to the north. And Kaulia especially hates Genesis because of an incident that occurred recently, and it caused Genesis to invade Kaulia. What happened was Kaulia had this practice where they would give mother sheep the option to have their babies killed for resources in exchange for money. And Kaulia didn't see anything wrong with that. They were like, it's their babies, their choice. But Genesis hated that, and they invaded Kaulia until they stopped. And Kaulia saw that as very paternalistic and very invasive, so Kaulia absolutely hates Genesis, and they really hate that their cousins to the north joined Genesis willingly. So yeah. They used to have these temples of sacrifice, and they still do, but Genesis invaded them to make sure they're not operational. Now, Fenshila is another example of a region that wasn't traditionally part of Genesis. It used to be part of Durlan, but the people there willingly became Genetian. So Fenshila is very similar to the rest of Durlan in terms of land makeup. This is the border, and this is Durlan, this is Genesis. And because of this, Fenshila is where most of the farming in Genesis is done, because it used to belong to Durlan, which does farming. You can see there are a lot of farms and stuff here. The next region is Sainam, another region that used to belong to Durlan. And Durlan accuses Genesis of colonizing this region too, because it used to look very tribal. It was inhabited by the native Goslin tribe, but then Genesis came and now it looks a lot more like the rest of Genesis with castles and stuff. So yeah, Durlan says Genesis colonized these two regions, but the people of these two regions will say that Genesis treated them better than Durlan ever did. So yeah. The last region is Kadia. Now this region sees how Genesis has been influencing these other regions and they don't want any of it. So Kadia is the one region that's not Christian, and it's also the one region that doesn't speak Genetian. Kadia is very similar to this country, Pharaoh. They speak the same language and they're basically the same people. The Cadians are basically Theronian minorities living in the country of Genesis. This is Pharaoh, this is Kadia, this is on the border. They're very similar. Just Pharaoh's a bit colder. That's all. So yeah, those are the regions. Now this is a biome map of Genesis. You can see Genesis has a very diverse range of biomes. Everything from jungle to fertile fields to desert and frozen bush. And because they have such a wide variety of biomes, they're pretty much self-sufficient. They don't import that much from other countries. They can grow their own food in here, and they can sort of do their own mining around here. So yeah, they have a lot of resources, and they can also harvest oak wood here, and they can harvest some acacia wood here. So yeah, they have a lot of stuff, and they don't really need to depend on anyone else for resources. This is a population map. You can see this is where the city of Genesis is, and that's the biggest cluster of population, but you can also see there are a lot of small towns scattered all throughout the countryside. Genesis has a law that every town, except in Kadia, of course, needs to have a church. This is very important because all churches will provide food to the poor, so a lot of people choose to live in small towns because anyone can get food from a church, but the churches will usually assign jobs to people, and when that happens, they defer people to the king, who will usually assign them a job. We'll talk more about that in a different section. But first, this is a temperature map of Genesis, and just like Genesis has a wide range of biomes, it also has a wide range of temperature. In the south here, there's the hot jungles, but then it very rapidly gets cooler as you go north, and even has a snowy, cold region here. So yeah, Genesis is not that big, but it still has a very wide temperature range. It's because it's on the border of some, it's sandwiched right between the ocean and the jungle, so that's why the isotherms are very compressed. Now, this is a rainfall map of Genesis. You can see there's the dry region and the wet region. This is because the west of the world is usually wet, and the east of the world is usually dry. Genesis has parts of both the west and the east, which is why there's a wet part of Genesis where the farming is usually done, and a dry part of Genesis where the mining is usually done. Okay, now here is a language map of Genesis. Most people speak Genetian as their native language, but some people here speak Theronian. This is Kadia, this is where the ethnic Theronians live. But basically everyone speaks Distant as sort of a lingua franca, because a lot of other countries speak Distant too. And both these languages, Genetian and Theronian, are descended from Distant. And they're similar, but they're not the same. So, yeah, Theronians speak the same language as the people in Pharaoh. The region of Kadia is basically just Theronian minorities. So yeah, most people here speak Genetian, but they didn't used to. So they used to speak these languages. The green languages are Western languages from the Durlan Empire, and this magenta is the Twilight language, which is the jungle native language. So the Westerners used to speak this language, these languages, and the jungle natives used to speak Twilight. But then Genesis came in, and then now they mostly just all speak Genetian. Okay, now let's talk about the government of Genesis. Genesis is a monarchy, but it also has a parliament, and the church has a lot of power too. So there are three branches. There's the royal branch, the legislative, and the clerical branch. The royal is the king, the legislative is the parliament, and the clerical is the church. So they all have sort of checks and balances. They check each other. The legislative branch checks the power of the king to make sure the king doesn't get too powerful, and the king makes sure everyone is following Genetian culture, so they preserve the culture of the church, and the church regulates the morals of the parliament. So yeah, it's a balance of power, balance between the three branches. So yeah, usually, like we said, the legislature makes laws, the parliament makes laws, but usually the king does projects. So if anyone's unemployed, they can go to their local church, and the church will defer them to the king to make sure they have a job, because the king is always doing some huge project. So the king appoints a duke over every duchy, and the parliament has two representatives from each duchy that are elected democratically, and the church has a bishop in every duchy except for Kadia, the one that's not Christian. So let's talk about the history of Genesis. The city of Genesis used to be in the poorest part of the Navaket Empire in this region over here, and it was a nothing little city. This was all it was back in the day. And it wasn't significant at all until this player named Cantor179 traveled to Genesis, and this player was a Christian, and he introduced Christianity to Genesis. He translated the whole Bible into their native language, Distant. And yeah, he introduced Christianity, and the whole city became Christian, and then they began spreading Christianity to the regions around them. So they tried to spread it in two directions, south and east. Now, the people here, they did accept Christianity, and the people here didn't. Most people think the reason why is because this region was a lot more poor, and this was relatively more wealthy, and generally Christianity tends to appeal to the poor, who need some meaning in their lives that is not dependent on materialistic things. So this region became Christian because of how much work the church was doing to help the poor, and you'll see all these poor villages, some of the poorest villages in the empire, that became Christian. You can see there's a cross here made of jungle wood and stuff. So yeah, then Christianity began spreading even further, and eventually some more wealthy people became Christian too. One of them founded a Christian university, which was actually a music university, and a lot of the best music in this Minecraft world, including hymns and the national anthem of Genesis, are written here in this music university. I've actually been here. It's called Zoverlon. It's really cool. This university has people from all over the world, but some countries ban their citizens from going here because many people convert to Christianity when they go here. So, yeah, I've been here, it's cool, but a lot of other countries don't think it's cool. So now, eventually, the kingdom of Ravinia split from the Navaket Empire. We'll talk more about that in the Pharaoh episode. It's very complicated, but basically, there was the kingdom of Ravinia, but eventually the king decided he only wanted to control the territories close to him, so he only wanted to control the territory around Pharaoh, and became the kingdom of Pharaoh, and then the other territories, including the region around Genesis, became independent. So yeah, now Genesis is an independent state. There's also the state of Medesh, which likes Genesis a lot because a lot of Christians live here too. And yeah, so Genesis and Medesh are best friends, but they have one big, powerful enemy, Durlan. Durlan was, about 20 years after Genesis became a state, Durlan went on a conquering spree. First, they conquered Kaulia. Then they conquered Medesh, and Genesis knew they were next, so they prepared. They sort of threw together a militia, and Durlan conquered almost all of Genesis. Genesis fled to this tip, and then Durlan hit them with everything they had in a huge battle, and somehow Genesis survived. If you ask someone from Genesis, they'll say it was a miracle. If you ask someone from Durlan, they'll say it's because Genesis secretly had help from Iapeta. Because of this, Durlan declared war on Iapeta as well, and this is when they started to lose the war because they couldn't fight all their enemies around them. And Iapeta teamed up with Genesis to liberate these countries, and when they liberated Medesh, they just became one country. They liberated Kaulia too, but they didn't become one country. And then all the countries worked together to tackle Durlan, and in the process, Genesis got a lot of land from Durlan. That's how Genesis got those territories from Durlan. So yeah, now they have these two territories that used to belong to Durlan, so how should they integrate them? So most of the people who lived here were actually enslaved or in forced labor. So Genesis gave them better labor by having them work on projects like the Parliament and the royal castle. And they were very well paid, which made them like Genesis a lot more. And if you ask Durlan, they'll say Genesis colonized them, but most of the people who were living here were actually enslaved in very terrible conditions. They were living on farms where they were sometimes killed for their resources, and Genesis liberated them from the farms and had them just work on building projects where they were paid well. So yeah, within one generation, most of the people in these regions abandoned their traditional tribal identities and became Genetian. So if you ask Durlan, they'll say, yeah, Genesis colonized them. But if you ask the people who actually live here, they'll say, Genesis treated us better and we found a new home. So yeah, that's where all the controversy is. So now let's talk about some notable spots you might want to see. There's the Royal Castle, which is beautiful. There's this national park, Dino Mountain National Park. The mountain, I guess, kind of looks like a dino. Either way, there's a lot of beautiful nature. There's this tabernacle. The Bible gives instructions for how Moses and the Israelites built the tabernacle, and Genesis followed the instructions carefully and built a replica of it, and it looks a lot like most people think the real tabernacle looked, so yeah, it's really cool. There's this desert station, which is surrounded by cacti, and they grow melons there. It's pretty cool. This is my favorite. This is Zoverlawn. This is the music university I went to. They have really good music. They have a church with people from everywhere. They also have a concert hall where I listen to them play Beethoven, and they have really cool paths through the jungle. And they have so many churches and castles, literally everywhere. There's this one. This is one of the coolest ones. It was built pretty recently. I went here to preach during Easter. This is in Fenshila, which is one of the regions that used to belong to Durlan. So they've kind of fused traditional Genetian architecture with Durlani architecture, and it's a masterpiece, especially the floor tiles made of glazed terracotta. There's so many elaborate floor patterns. It's a really cool place. You should check it out. And of course, there's this church. This was the first church ever built in this Minecraft world, and it's where Christianity kind of started in this Minecraft world. So yeah, now let's talk about Genesis's relations with other countries. So once again, Durlan kind of doesn't like them that much because Genesis took some of their land. Durlan accuses Genesis of working with Iapeta, but Genesis does not work with Iapeta. At least they claim to not work with Iapeta. So yeah, Durlan doesn't really like Genesis, but they still use Genesis to trade with Pharaoh. They just sort of have a train that goes through Genesis. They just tell their citizens not to interact with the locals. So yeah, it's kind of an awkward relationship. Now, Pharaoh is like Genesis's brother that took on a completely different lifestyle. So, most Pharaonians are okay with Genesis. They just would wish Genesis would cut out the whole religion thing. Now, Lonia doesn't really like anyone, so Genesis has no relations with them. Genesis tries to help out Bodam, because Bodam's really poor, but Bodam, once again, feels like this is just an effort to spread their religion, so they usually reject it. And of course, Genesis's worst enemies are Cowlia. They're the country that Genesis invaded to stop their practice of sacrificing babies. So yeah, there are no countries that love Genesis, but aside from Cowlia, there are no countries that hate them. Everyone's just kind of a little suspicious of them. They're one of the few countries that's neutral in the war between Durlan and Iapeta, and the result is that everyone assumes they're on the other side. So they don't have that many friends, but that's actually kind of okay because they're mostly self-sufficient. Yeah, with all the drama going on in this world, Genesis is kind of off doing its own thing. Probably because they paid attention when Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world." Stay tuned. Hanakwa is coming up next.